and welcome to another episode of Tesseract Talks, the place where we put the spotlight on tech trends, startups, and VCs. I'm your host, Marko, the founder and CEO of Tesseract Analytics, and it is my pleasure today to have Andrew Levy as our guest. He's an engineer and entrepreneur. Currently, as a co-founder and CEO, he's building Aircover, solution which is bringing GenAI to live sales calls. Andrew, welcome. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, in preparation for the episode, I went through your CV, and you have an interesting journey where you went from being an engineer in multiple companies to then becoming an entrepreneur. Why don't we start by you telling us chronologically through your career from early days up until Aircover?
Yeah. So, I knew I always wanted to start a company. Grew up on the East Coast of the U.S. Made my way to Silicon Valley to do just that. It was originally HP that brought me out as an engineer working on data warehousing systems. Maybe not the most exciting thing for a new grad to work on, but met a lot of great people. Had a good experience of what it means to build enterprise software, and eventually got into a few companies ago, got into Y Combinator. This was summer of 2009. That was a fantastic experience. If you don't know, they're a startup accelerator incubator out in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that company, we ended up pivoting a few times and shutting down. But that was a great way, initially to build out the network and have that experience of building a company. We were with a lot of great folks. I was in the same batch as Stripe and WePay and Mixpanel and a bunch of other great companies. And then actually continued on the incubator route, and for the next company went through AngelPad. And so what we did was, this was around January of 2011. Me and the team were building mobile applications, and our apps were slow and laggy and crashing. And so we focused on that as our issue. We had built some tooling to handle performance issues and monitor it. We realized that was a widespread problem. And so that became the product of my last company, which had a funny name at first. It was called Crittercism. You can see some of them behind me actually on the shelf there. But we eventually renamed it to Apteligent. But if you use Netflix anytime between 2011 and 2019, we were under the hood powering all their telemetry, crashes, work performance, things like that, among other great brands. Ended up selling that company to VMware in 2017. Around that time, we were on something like 1 billion devices worldwide. VMware needed a solution to accelerate their own analytics investments, especially around employee and workforce analytics. And so I was there for 4 years and built that business up to be pretty significant in terms of ARR. During that time, I had to train, coach, and enable the VMware sales team. This was a new product in a new space. And, we ran into just a bunch of issues in the industry that, is pretty prevalent, right? We put out content. It was hard to get the field to engage with that content. We'd get them in a training session. Felt like, even if we felt like we got them to a good spot, new product, new service, new competitor, we had to go back and do it all over again. And, the state of the art at the time was, okay, let's try to record something and see how people are pitching. It wasn't scalable. And speaking of analytics, the analytics were pretty basic, right? It was maybe you could track if a word came up in a meeting, but you really didn't understand, why were you winning or losing? What were the pain points or the objectives of the customers? And so that's eventually what led to Aircover. And Aircover is my current company started with Alex and David. We had worked together at my previous startup. And so this was June of 21. We got, started an AI company right as the AI craze was about to take off. So the timing was good. But really the intent was, to solve an issue that we were having. And, that's almost the number one advice you typically hear is, scratching your own itch, having that domain expertise or that experience to understand, the problem and craft a solution for it. So that's how we got started.
What trend or challenge in the market led you to create Aircover? But so as you said, it's from your own challenges that you felt like, okay, like something like this could help us elevate, right?
Yeah, the stars aligned because there was a few trends that were in our favor, right? So you had you had video conferencing and phone becoming more of a platform that you could build upon. Compute had gotten to the point where you could in real time actually process conversation, start to make sense of it. And of course, on the AI side, the tooling available and the latest in terms of models that were available, all of that helped accelerate what we were trying to do, which is, imagine you could build the entirety of your knowledge and domain expertise into every conversation and, instantly answer any question that you get on a call, help pitch more effectively, answer objections in real time. And then, before and after the call, have data to understand what's working, what's not working, both for the individual rep from a coaching perspective, for the managers to see, how their teams are doing, and for the executive team to see, okay, what are the trends in our business? And then using that data to funnel back into those conversations to drive what additional coaching or changes in messaging, positioning need to happen. So that was the unlock was, okay, from a market infrastructure perspective, it was now possible to do these things that we wanted to do where, you could also, costs were coming down so you could build a business around it. And then, we basically were able to, solve it using those technologies.
Amazing that you saw that trend and potential in the market. Can you tell us now a bit more about some more use cases or stats of if you've compared Aircover users versus non-Aircover users?
Yeah, so
what value, and maybe you can touch upon also who is your target audience. Is it larger enterprises or SMBs or?
Yeah, that's another interesting part of the story is that, a lot of startups, they will start more SMB, mid-market, PLG. We did a little bit of the reverse. We started initially focused on the enterprise. The thought was, okay, large multi-product, multi-service organizations, they have, the sales folks and really the broad go-to-market team, because we service a variety of personas, pre-sales, post-sales, the surrounding functions of that marketing as well. They basically pain points where, they have trouble getting up to speed quickly. It's hard, training takes a while, and there's some stats that show that, sales reps, they forget something like 80% of what they heard in the classroom after 2 months, right? And so you can think of it like reinforcement learning for your sales, for your field, for your go-to-market team. And it's that old adage, you need to hear something like 6 or 7 times to internalize it. It's essentially what we're doing. So as you're speaking, we can surface information, before and after the meeting, you have that information available as well. And it's had a huge impact. So we've seen, we had one enterprise cybersecurity customer that saw something like an 83% increase to win rate. Just to dig one level deeper, because that's more of kind of an end result. If you look in the pipeline, we've seen, reps able to do better discovery. We've seen higher, something like a 57% higher average sales price at a financial services customer. That was largely attributed to being able to sell the attach, quote unquote, the additional products and services. A lot of sales reps, they're good at the core selling motion, but as you add additional products and services, they tend to feel like, mile wide, inch deep, or masters of none, where it can be hard to stay up to speed on, all those releases. And so we can help reinforce that messaging, positioning, identify what sales motion to go down by listening for patterns in the call. So for example, if you're selling, I'll just make up I'll use a security example again. If you're selling, I don't know, a firewall, and someone starts to complain about something related to email security, we can pick up on that and say, okay, actually, maybe you should ask these additional questions to see if, your email gateway product is a fit, as an example of that, right? So it helps to...
Sorry to ask, and that would come as a kind of a live recommendation or later as a review?
Both. So live in the conversation, we are able to look through the entirety of your company's content. We can summarize it, figure out when it should come up in conversation, and it's actually surfaced to the sales rep as they're speaking. And so that's had a huge impact in terms of average sales price. From a ramp time perspective, we had one of the largest credit reporting agencies in the US is a customer of ours. They saw their ramp times go from 6 weeks to 2 weeks. So the reps were able to get up to speed much faster, feel comfortable immediately on these calls. And then finally, there's automation built into this. There's an agentic AI is all the rage right now, and we can talk about that later. Everything from automating CRM entry for the reps, for the agents, drafting emails, follow-up emails, helping them understand next steps. It saves at least 10 hours a week for our users.
Great. So what would you say is next for Aircover, or what's the focus for this year? Mm-hmm. And also, if people are interested, is there a way they can test the product, or they should just reach out to one of the Aircover sales reps? What will be the best way?
Yeah, so they can go to our website, fill out the form, we'll be in touch. For this year, we continue to focus on our enterprise customers. For SMB and mid-market, we are going to be releasing some packages for them as well. You can actually take advantage of those today, but we're going to be making it a bit more self-service for those folks. So that's something coming this year. From a product perspective, just did a push, just to mention agentic AI again, we did just make a push around that where we had a pretty killer demo of what's possible today. A lot of folks, especially just AI broadly, they're talking about future use cases. Maybe they're spinning up products in lab environments or R&D environments. If you have one takeaway from this, what Aircover does is practical and impactful AI that you can use today. That's basically in use and at scale. And we have another customer where we process something like 600,000 calls a month. So whether you're in a contact center, whether you're a B2B sales team and you have inside sales reps or enterprise sales reps, we operate in those areas. But going back to your question, one of the things that we released that was really exciting was a live pricing agent. So essentially think of it like, if you think about a normal CPQ process where you're trying to create a quote for a customer, it can take a while. Everything from gathering the information to getting it hooked up into your filling out the forms, getting the quote generated. We automated that full process where we can detect what the example is, how many a sales rep asking a prospect, how many widgets do you want to buy, right? And collecting information about the purchase. And then we actually extract that from the conversation. We sync it back to Salesforce. We automatically generate the quote, and then the quote appears in the sales rep's inbox for them to review and send to the customer. And so that's just one example of how, you can really lean into automation and agentic AI to take what may have, in some cases, we've heard customers tell us took, 2 days previously, be instant for these reps.
Wow, great. As a CEO and co-founder, funding is obviously one of the most important things to accelerate the growth of your company. And you obviously have experience in this field. Can you share some insights on how do you decide when a new funding round is needed? And also, how do you pick the right investor?
It's a great question. In my last company, we had what some people might refer to as a party round for the seed round, where we just got as many VCs in there as possible and angel investors. It was our first. It wasn't my first company, but it was the first company we had raised significant money for. And so we made a lot of, I'd say, maybe not mistakes, but we made a lot of decisions that as a second-time founder, you do have the privilege of having a bit more leeway, having a bit more, basically being able to choose who you want to work with. And so I think that's the important thing, is don't just optimize on the firm. You want to optimize around the person that you're bringing on board as well. And I tend to love to work with former operators that, have been there, done it before, where you can get a variety of experiences and backgrounds around the table, whether it's sales, marketing, product. Almost think of it like an extension of your team. Same way you'd build an advisory board outside of fundraising, right? So if you can do that, great. I tend to shy away from, if you've only been in finance your entire career, no offense to those people, but I just love for people to have that experience of being on the other side of the fence, if that makes sense. A lot of VC firms, the bigger ones, will talk about various services they offer, like recruiting and, perks and discounts and things like that. I mean, that's pretty pervasive for the large firms, so I wouldn't put much weight in that. With that said, I would put more weight in terms of the networks that they've built and the communities that they've built. So that's another aspect to dig into. And then in terms of timing and amount, I would say shy away. If you don't get to that MVP without raising a huge amount of money, I think that's always a smart choice. Of course, if you're competing in a market where all of your competitors are raising huge rounds, it can be difficult, especially when you're in a hype cycle. So you have to balance that, and you have to be able to grow into that valuation that you ultimately raise at. So, there is that temptation to try to drive that price up as high as you can, but, just make sure you think ahead, because that will come due.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for coming to the show, sharing your story and valuable insights. That was all for today. And I hope we will catch up in future, either on another episode or maybe in Silicon Valley or here in London. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm Andrew at aircover.ai, so feel free to reach out.
Great. Bye. Thank you.